Start us off, Carter.
And welcome back to the Debbie Reynolds Memorial Dance-Off. Wait a minute, Tom.
Yeah, it's me, bro. I'm here.
What are you doing here?
Well, I killed Kevin and buried his body, and now I'm gonna do the talking about the footballs because I know so much.
Man, we really got to sign you up for those improv classes. That was nuts. What you just said.
Let's just say it's a plan that I've had for a while. No, it isn't. Hello, Kevin is moving, and I'm here to
Yes.
fill in for
Hi.
him.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Carter and Kevin Explain Football. Carter here.
And I'm Tom, not Kevin.
Yes, and you're probably wondering what happened here. And our dear, fearless leader, Kevin, is currently just knees deep in
Going
boxes,
for it.
packages, figuring out how to move his entire life up to Connecticut, everyone's favorite state. And he also came down with a bit of a cold last week. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get our week 3 recording in. And as a stickler for order and as a stickler for organization, and just thinking it's fun to have like 18 straight weeks of episodes, I said, this simply can't stand. We need to do a week 3 episode to remind people of things that happened 2 weeks ago that are already completely different because of the previous week that just happened. And we decided it's time to call up Tom.
Yes, I'm here because I know about football now, even though I really don't. But I have been watching because I'm in
He's
a fantasy
learning.
league, and I'm learning. And I'm in a fantasy league with my friend Kenny Mack, and he is very flummoxed by things, so I usually get all my knowledge about what's going wrong through him. But yeah,
Yes.
we're going to talk about the week that surprised me in a lot of ways. I kind of went into the week thinking that it was going to be poopy because the first Thursday night game was the Jets versus was the Jets and the Patriots, and I'm like, this is going to be a stinker. And it ended up being that the Jets really turned it around and kind of Aaron Rodgers kind of
Looked
really
like
laid
himself.
down the law. And well, I mean, not that, yeah, I guess I haven't seen Aaron Rodgers play as a Jet before because he got injured last season. I'm sure you guys have talked about that already. But, um,
Yes.
and then we
Oh,
had the
that's
Panthers
interesting. I didn't
locking
think
in.
about
We
that.
had the Bills blowing out their competition. The Vikings keeping up their 3-0 streak. We all have to talk about.
But yeah, I didn't think about that in the context of you have never, because you got into football in the last few years, so you don't really have a frame of reference for what Aaron Rodgers looked like before everyone realized he was a crazy person.
No, I know he's a great sport. I know he was on the Packers for a while.
Yes.
That's what I knew about him.
Um,
I would say I got really into football like last year because that was the first time I
mhm.
was in a fantasy league, even though it was just a joke. And I'm all about the stats. But um, I mean, I went to
God,
like Super Bowl parties, and I always root for the Eagles because that's my wife's family's team, you know. But
mhm. God, that's like getting into basketball and being like, why does everyone keep talking about this Michael Jordan guy on the Washington Wizards? He's not very good. And people being like, no, you don't
you
understand.
heard it here
You don't
first.
understand.
Carter's comparing
Before the
Aaron
liver problems
Rodgers to
kicked in.
Michael Jordan. You heard it here
No, no,
first.
I would rather die. There's a couple people in this sport I would compare to Michael Jordan. He is not one of them.
Mm.
But yeah, to sort of recap the week, I'm going to take us through our usual topics, our highlights, our lowlights, our notable notes. We are going to skip the next week discussion because that week already happened, and it is very weird that you reference the Bills because it's a very different vibe from one week to
No
the other. I'm going
spoilers, Carter.
Yeah, well, see, I'm trying to get my brain back to where it was last week. So I'm not just being like, yeah, and then this didn't matter because this happened, or, these Chiefs concerns are even bigger because Rasheed Rice's knees exploded. Um, but yeah, let's start off with the highlights. I'm going to start in a weird spot, the other Monday Night Football game, the one that was actually entertaining. I will say, personally, and like be careful what you wish for. I do kind of wish the Bills games were a little closer, only because the minutes when you get into a game where it's non-competitive at the start of the third quarter and they pull the starting quarterback, you're like, oh god, I have to watch Mitchell Trubisky for 2 whole
I mean,
quarters.
I think they do that because it's like, okay, now like I mean, I remember watching that game and looking at the stands and I'm like, oh my God, like they're empty because people are just leaving because they know the outcome and they're trying to beat traffic, right?
Right, they're
And
either partying or they're beating traffic.
right, and Carter, known guy who eats the crust off the pizza first, is starting with the last game of the week, but I still think it's
What?
important to bring up. Well, you
Put that
picked
on
Monday night.
me.
What do you mean? You picked Monday Night
I
Football.
don't eat crust for what? Am I a degenerate?
No, I'm trying to cancel you over food because that's how I understand everything is through food. But yeah,
Uh,
it's an interesting thing you bring up about this idea of changing out the starting quarterback because you know, spoiler alert, I mean, I guess we're uploading this after the week is already this last week has already happened, but the Bills did that again this week in a
but
much
in a
different
different
situation,
context.
in a much different context. And I disagree with their play for this week, but last week it made sense. You don't want Joshy Boy to get hurt.
Right. The Bills have been very snake bitten with injuries, but it really is. And like something I'll talk about a little bit here is a lot of quarterback talk in terms of we're facing kind of a crisis in the NFL where there's just not a lot of very good backup quarterbacks. Um, to streamline the conversation as much as possible, in the mid 2010s, they did a really, really big change to how contracts work. So it used to be when you were drafted, you would negotiate how much you get, like your agent would negotiate what the final numbers are. So every agent was fighting to be like, well, my number one overall pick got the most guaranteed money any first overall pick's gotten. And it would result in a situation where a lot of players would hold out. So rookies would just not play and sit around and basically wait till the team caved. This kind of culminated in one of the most famous disasters. Jamarcus Russell, a number one overall pick quarterback. He was the new hotness. He was like 6'5". He could throw the ball 700 yards.
Yeah.
He ends up holding out till November. His rookie year, the most important position on the field, doesn't start till November, and he ends up becoming kind of the biggest bust in the sport's history. He was basically never good. I think he won like 2 games over like 3 years. Uh, he had way more interceptions than touchdowns. And also, apparently, he was just very unhelpful in the locker room. There's a very famous story where secretly suspecting that he wasn't watching the tapes he was supposed to of like the other team's coverages, they gave him a bunch of blank tapes with the assumption of, well, if he's watching them, he'll realize we gave him dummy tapes and bring it up, and then we'll know he's watching them. He pretended like there was stuff on them, which underlines that he wasn't watching them. Anyway, the point of this was the NFL decided, you know what? No, there's a set amount of money each rookie makes. If you're drafted here, you get this much. If you're drafted here, you get that much, which means you could theoretically get a really, really good quarterback in the first round for basically pennies on the dollar. You could save a crazy amount of money. And so instead of like building up the middle tier of quarterbacks, guys who can be good backups or competent starters, everyone's just rushing for the youngest guy because it's like, hey, if he hits, then we get to save all of this money on the most important position and pay everyone else. Unfortunately, that's not really how it works because it's very hard to play quarterback and only a handful of guys end up being good at it. So, like, this middle tier of quarterbacks are very bad, which is how you get into a situation where you're watching the Bills with Mitchell Trubisky and you're like, thank God Josh isn't hurt.
I wish that they would standardize the rates of pay for the streaming services like that because trying to find streaming services to cover this legally and is quite a
Yes.
challenge. But
Well,
it is
see,
interesting you bring up backup quarterbacks because one of the first football games I ever went to that was actually I think it was no, it was the second football ever game I ever went to. I went to an Eagles game with my wife and her father and her brother, and we were
mhm.
watching when Jalen got hurt and Jalen was sick or something, and Gardner Minshew played, who was backup quarterback at the time for the Eagles,
Oh,
played the whole
yeah. I
game.
remember
That
this.
was awful. That
And
was
Gardner Minshew
awful.
is one of the better ones.
Right, and it's just like and I mean, if you saw last week's game or this current week's game from the Browns, you can see that like Gardner was just not it. Like I know Kevin likes Minshew Madness, but he's missing throws,
We all know
he's
we
tripping
know
on the
who he
turf,
is.
and like when you go and you see that and you're like, oh man, so they really don't have anybody in backup, which really makes it like I understand more when like, for example, uh when Josh Allen like runs the ball and he like slides as opposed to just trying for the fourth, like if he's close to the down but it's only like the first or second, like he won't like try and
He's been
tackle to get
making
through. He's
business
gonna like
decisions this year on that front.
right, he's gonna
Since
like
the first game where he
slide.
hurt his hand, he's making business decisions.
And I think that has to do with his age too. Like you don't want to once you get to like a certain age in the NFL, you don't want to push it because it's harder to bounce back. Like say somebody like
Mhm.
comparatively speaking, a 25-year-old Jalen Hurts compared to a I don't even know what 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers. It's like
Right.
you got to kind of balance that. which is ironic because Jalen does the same thing, but I understand why.
Yes. But this conversation leads us into like kind of what happens when you do hit on the young quarterback. I my note here is this Commanders versus Bengals game was the start of what I'm calling the Jalen Daniels space program. Um, so Jalen Daniels is was the second overall pick. He was the Heisman Trophy winner from LSU. The Heisman Trophy is basically like the MVP award for college football, but it's like more prestigious.
Oh yeah, I
It's
know
like
what it is.
considered this like cool exclusive club. Yeah, because they have the commercials and stuff. You'd know. Um, Interesting guy because it's like it took him a while to really hit. He had a couple rough years at Arizona State before he went to LSU and took off. Um, I call it the space program because he's good at two very specific things. He is very fast. Like there's a lot of different kinds of running quarterbacks in the NFL. There's like the Josh Allen who's like rumbling, bumbling, stumbling. Like it looks like he's playing backyard football and had too many
It really
beers.
does.
There's like there's the Russell Wilson or the Patrick Mahomes where it looks like you're like carefully holding a beer and just trying to juke through the crowd. Like you're
Mhm.
like, how has no one tackled this guy already? There's Lamar Jackson, who is like the most like
I was gonna
dynamic
bring up
person in
Jackson.
space
Yeah,
you've yeah. He's the most dynamic person in space you've ever seen, where it's like he's phase shifting like an anime character.
that's why we have him on our fantasy
Jalen,
teams.
yes, but Jalen Daniels, as my dog loses his mind up there,
Yeah,
man,
that's
old dogs. Jalen Daniels is just straight line speed. Like on plays where he fakes the handoff and just decides to run it himself, it's kind of like, what are you even going to do? He's going to get 5 yards before anyone can even react to him. And
mhm.
the other thing he does really well is he throws the most beautiful deep pass in the league right now. I call them moon balls or moon shots because they're so high up in Madden. You would when you watched instant replay on Madden, you'd have to tilt the camera all the way up and look at it and be like, "Wow, it's leaving the stadium. It's going so high."
I love these
Um,
Carter
it,
terms because now I'm gonna be yelling them when they happen on for our teams.
yes, I'm trying to. Every good commentator comes up with one cool piece of lingo. I really need to commit. But yeah, so the Commanders go against the Bengals. They're not considered the favorite. And for the second straight week in a row, they literally do not punt the ball. They score on every single drive. So from the start of the first quarter, touchdown, 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 field goal, touchdown. Um, Daniels looks absolutely incredible. He just looks shockingly poised for a guy who's this like new to the NFL, and especially a guy who's like kind of frail. That was like his downside going into the league. He's only like 205, I think.
Oh wow,
Like
so he
he's
really doesn't have
fringe
like the
200
girth that a
pounds.
lot of these guys have to like be able to take a
Yes.
tackle and like still break it.
Yes, someone described it well as like every now and then he'll get hit in a way that makes it look like Tom from Tom and Jerry got hit with a cartoon mallet. Um, but he wrapped this game up. And what's amazing with his stats, he was 21 of 23, one of the highest completion percentages for like a starting quarterback in any NFL game. And basically, the last play he made, the one, and they needed this. They needed this to like seal the game. None of these points were like, oh, we're front running or we're down a lot, so let's get garbage points. He throws this 27-yard perfect pass to Terry McLaurin as he's getting hit. Like the play came in late. He's scrambling to get everyone ready. They completely miss a defensive lineman who just takes him, literally like body slams him to the ground, and yet he's able to have the poise to take the hit and also throw just this beautiful moon ball and scores the touchdown. It really felt like a coming out game for him in terms of like this is the exact ideal scenario you'd want to see him in. They're doing all of the stuff you'd want to see him do. And for a franchise that has been stuck with a crappy owner for the longest time, who finally got ousted by the NFL in kind of an unprecedented fashion of like everyone pressuring him to sell the team, like the vibes have gone from uh, in the dirt to hey, everything looks kind of good right now.
Hey, we have some seedlings planted.
Exactly. That's what it is. Like at this point, everything from the here to the rest of the year is kind of house money. The main thing is keep Jalen healthy and evaluate what you need going forward to like optimize success. And I hate to say it, with how the inconsistent the Eagles have been, and with how bad the Cowboys have looked, and how giantsy the Giants have been,
Oh yeah,
I'm like, are we sure they're not just going to make the playoffs this year?
the Northeast or the Northeast, the
NFC.
NFC has been struggling this football season already. And we're going to
Yes.
get into that when we talk about the Eagles game. But there are games like that. I feel like the Eagles, Giants, like when they win a game, they don't deserve to, and when they lose a game, they're blown out of the water. Like it just doesn't. I think there
Yeah.
was one good Giants game, like where Daniel Jones actually kind of locked in and they got a lot of points, but almost every other game for the NFC East has been really close, really tight, and it almost always comes down to if there's a victory, it's because in the Eagles' case, the defense like really held their own, or they held them to field goals, or for some reason there were bad play calls on the other team. But it just seems like that, and that's part of the reason why the Vikings being so like having this 4-0 now record is kind of crazy because we have teams that are like struggling every week. And if you ask me, I mean, you can go back and watch the video. Like we predicted the NFL, how the NFL teams were going to do. I don't think I ranked the Vikings as doing very good because who would? Like I mean, I know they're statistically okay, but I put the Ravens having a better win loss ratio than them, and look where that's ended up. Not that the Ravens have been bad; they've been pretty good,
Right.
but they've lost some close games here and there, which is also something to consider.
Right. Right. Yeah. And yeah, it is. It really is like the masterclass of like professional sports in general. It's like you don't the minute like the things start moving, you immediately go, "Oh, that was so obvious in hindsight." Or you look at like you're either like, "God, what is wrong with this team?" or like, "Why is this team so good?" And you just kind of have a moment where you're like, "Of course. Why didn't I think of that?" Like, of course they would design the offense specifically around what Jalen Daniels is good at and just dominate the line of scrimmage. But
Yeah,
speaking of the
hindsight is 20
Giants,
for 20. Do you get it?
yes,
That's a conversion joke.
um, another highlight: the New York Saquon Barkleys have rebranded as the New York Malik
The
Neighbors.
New York
So
Saquon Barkley's.
yes, a joke me and Kevin have is for the longest time the New York Giants have been the New York Saquon Barkleys because he's basically the only thing keeping that team upright. And
Hmm.
now he's the only thing keeping the Philadelphia Eagles upright, as it
Well,
turns out.
yes, except for there was that game where he missed that game-winning catch.
Yes.
And that's, I mean,
But
obviously everyone's entitled to mistakes, but yeah,
yeah, but like also don't let Kirk Cousins go like 90 yards. Um,
yeah,
but so the Giants beat the Browns 21-15. Truly a masterclass in like no, I insist after you. No, because
okay,
both
so this
teams
is the game
basically
I was talking
begged the
about.
other to win the game.
Yeah, it's like
Yes.
these close games and like there's bad play calls and it just happens to be that the one team ekes out a victory over the other based
Right.
on just not like just luck, but there's a lot of factors that go into it that, to cosplay the announcers was like they're not playing complimentary football, but like, it just seems like there's kind of some leaky pipes there.
Oh yeah. But yeah, basically the Giants tried to hand the Browns this game right away. Uh, on the opening kickoff, they fumbled it, and the Browns immediately score on the next play. You literally hand them basically, it's like a 10 to 14 point swing because not only did you not score on your drive, not only did you lose basically like, you effectively lost the coin flip after you won it. You also gave them a touchdown. And from there, Malik Neighbors kind of just started cooking. 8 catches, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns. One of the most incredible, like, he's not very tall. I think he's only like 6'1". And yet he had this pirouette catch. That's one of the most beautiful plays I've ever seen from a wide receiver. Like, immediately you're like, oh, I understand why people wanted this guy to get drafted higher because he is a literal lightning in a bottle sort of energy where it's like if we open this cork, sparks are going to fly. And the team very clearly understands that because they are feeding him the ball. I believe he might be leading the league in targets this year, which is like, obviously how many times the ball is actually thrown to you. Um, in general, and like, yeah, he had 12 targets in this game on top of his 8 catches. He has led the team in like targets and almost led the team in touches basically every single game this year. They let him throw a pass. They were just like, fuck it, let's try everything. Um, and it is kind of frustrating to see the Browns actually aren't that bad. Their offensive line is good for the first time in forever. Their defense is actually pretty decent.
That's
It's
true. They
just
did put up a good fight.
right. It's the fundamental problem of, yeah, but you gave a very bad quarterback too much money.
Yeah.
But I really do think the rookie of the year will come down to him or Jalen Daniels. Basically, probably who has the winning record, and it's probably going to be Daniels. Um, yeah, not too much to say on that game other than this was a very highly touted class of rookie wide receivers, and it is already paying dividends. My next note is the Malik Willis killed him with kindness revenge game.
I
So
like that
Malik
title.
Willis, yes. Malik Willis is kind of, and as we're talking about quarterbacks, he is kind of like a lot of discussion this year in terms of quarterbacks, and especially young quarterbacks, has been this idea of nature versus nurture. The idea of like if a quarterback gets drafted and fails to make an impression with his team, is it because of that individual player and his personal failings, like his work ethic, his skill set, etc., etc., or is it a failure of the team to build something around him to get the most out of his talent? And I would argue Malik Willis is weirdly one of the best examples of that. Because he's had to step in for the Packers after Jordan Love suffered a very scary knee injury in the opening weekend in Brazil against the Eagles.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah. That was. I was like, damn. I remember watching that and being
yeah,
like,
like the knee popped.
I was like, is this the
He's an
next Aaron Rodgers situation?
Right, and thank God it wasn't, because that would have fucking blown if, like, all the hype for the Packers. Again, we have so few good young quarterbacks. We can't lose one right now, please. But yes, Malik Willis has been on the
Please,
team
bro,
for about a
please.
month now. They traded for him at the 11th hour. He was a quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. He went to, like, basically not a junior college, but a lower division college. Like, they don't play the LSUs of the world, they play, like, a lower tier. And the idea of drafting him was always, well, he's not ready to play right now. But out of all these quarterbacks, he has the most physical gifts. He's fast, he's strong, he's got a good arm. Like, if you give him time, he could develop into something. The Titans coach clearly hated him. So you're familiar with AJ Brown, right?
Of course I am. He's on my fantasy team, though he has been out for the entire season after the first game, I think. Was he even in the first game? I don't even remember.
No, he was very good in the first game, but then
Oh,
yeah,
that was right.
just
That's right. Because I remember he kind of
futility.
carried us, and then that's how we won the first week, and then he's been out ever since. Hoping that this bye week is where he comes back. But yes, I am very familiar with AJ Brown. I was actually thinking about that when you were talking about this kind of targeting. And of course, we
Hmm,
have like Travis Kelsey and Patrick Mahomes, but that's like a tight end quarterback kind of relationship. We're talking about why when we were talking about wide receiver to quarterback, or we have this heavy targeting, like what the Giants were doing. Um, you were
right.
seeing that with AJ Brown in the beginning, and then once Saquon started pushing and started proving himself, that was when that dichotomy shifted. Um, but yeah, AJ
Right.
Brown really really good. From my understanding, he
Yes.
is friends
He
with
he
Jalen and all that.
he originally played for the Tennessee Titans. Um, and it was a situation where the Titans kind of had blown through their budget. They couldn't really afford, they kind of had to decide between a handful of players, and A.J. Brown was the one they ended up having to trade. And very famously, Mike Rabel in the draft room, as it's being announced, has a look on his face, a look of just complete emotional despair that I could only describe as when someone finally has to make the difficult choice to put their puppy down. Like
Damn.
that's how devastated he was to lose his like, one of his favorite players. So in drafting Malik Willis, there was just a passive aggressiveness to it. Like he was very bad in Tennessee, but at the same time, the coaches kind of were throwing him to the dogs where it's like, you are not supposed to be playing in your rookie year. And what's more, this offense does not fit you at all. They basically were trying to put a square peg into a circular hole by being like, all right, run this West Coast offense. Quick passes, quick decision making, like read the defense before you move. And it's like, that was never going to be what this guy does. He was built to be like a run the ball, like read option, like basically the complete opposite offense of what you're putting him in. So you kind of threw him to the wolves. Whereas the Green Bay Packers, in a very impressive coaching job by Matt LaFleur, was just like, all right, we are going to build the ideal offense around you to get you through these next couple weeks. We are going to run the hell out of the ball. We are going to have twice as many runs as we are carries. And then we're going to keep it to simple, like passing options where it's like deep shots, slants, and if nothing's open, just put your head down, get the yards. The yards matter most. It doesn't matter how we get them. And as a result, they ended up winning 2 straight games. And very famously, there's a great one of the great quotes of the year was someone asked him before the game against the Titans, like, "Do you want to get revenge? Do you want to get back at this team you played with?" And he's like, "I don't have any problem. I appreciate they drafted me. All my checks went through as best I could tell. I appreciate the
All
organization."
my
Malik
checks went
Willis,
through.
yeah, he's been personified throughout his whole career as being like a pretty jovial, nice guy. He very famously at the combine bought clothes for a homeless person. And yeah, he killed them with kindness. They absolutely kicked their asses. Malik Willis had 202 passing, 10 yards per throw, a quarterback rating of 94 out of 100, and almost ran for 100 yards. Truly an utterly dominant performance. And again, it is the nature versus nurture thing is very difficult. And I tend to fall on like in a situation like his, where you do have physical gifts, where you do have physical talent, it does come down to the team to figure out how to get the best out of that talent. Um, and I will compare that to sort of the opposite example shortly when we talk about the lowlights.
Oh yeah, I can't wait for that.
Um, yes. Other news is this is a highlight in terms of like an individual play. The Detroit Lions go silly mode. Um, So the Detroit Lions were coming off kind of a difficult game. They kind of got up, not embarrassed, but like kind of a shocking loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where it felt like they got a little too cute with like getting away from what they are, a heavy run team with a lot of different options to pass. So for the most part, this game was more of a classic methodical Lions win. Dominate the offensive line, just keep pushing the ball, keep pounding the rock, get a lead early, and kind of just, take advantage of the fact that you can eat way more clock than them. Except one time, probably one of the plays of the year, Amon-Ra St. Brown catches the ball, takes 2 steps, and immediately flips it back to the running back, who scores a touchdown. Hook and ladder play, they call it, um, where you pitch the ball back. I'm trying to see if I can find a copy of it for you real quick, just so you can have a visual
this was
frame
in
of
the
reference.
this was in the Lions game.
Yes. Yes, they played the Arizona Cardinals, who started as like one of the sleeper picks for this year, but unfortunately they've kind of been underperforming. Their offense is good, but their defense is very weak, and they kind of just got stunted on this play. I don't know why they call it a hook and ladder. I'm assuming it's because the player who gets the ball thrown to them is the hook.
Hmm.
Um, it is a reminder that they do have a very exciting young offensive coordinator who is probably up for a head coaching job this time around and will probably, be pulling fun little things like this out of his bag to like show off how talented he is.
Let's see, I have it up. Oh, sorry, I have a Chiefs ad, as if we're going to talk about that.
Oh, yes.
Okay, here we go. Hook and ladder play. Off to St. Brown to Gibbs. Ooh, that was beautiful.
Yes. Every now and then this sport can be very, very beautiful.
I do like the it was kind of like a fake, like you would see to a wide like a quarterback going to throw to a wide receiver. But
Yeah.
instead of like holding the ball out and making it really obvious, he'd almost looked like hot potato. Like he caught it and just like when you keep a balloon off the ground when you're a kid, you just kind of like tapped it so that the other guy could grab it.
Right. There was like a grace to it where it was like honestly perfectly executed.
Hmm.
Um, Next up is our Don't Sleep On game, which for us is basically a game where you might not have been checking in regularly, but its result is interesting and might say a lot for the direction the season or individual teams are going. And I'm referring to the Vikings absolutely lambasting the Houston Texans
Oh
34 to
yeah,
7. This game is another example of what I would describe as simply non-competitive. One of those rare games where almost immediately you're like, "Oh, gee, okay, this isn't this is
I
just going
will
to be one of
say
those
you have a
days.
pretty good eye for that because when we were watching the Bills game this week, you said the same thing. You were like, "This is going to be one of those games," and it turned out to be one of those games.
Yeah, it just every now and then you get a game because it's a long season. The season's too long. I'm a fan of every sports league cutting their season by a quarter, and the NFL is no exception. Less
Mm.
games, better quality. Papa John's.
Well, would that
Uh,
actually? I guess they have to do that because of buys, right? Like that's the reason why the season's so long because there's so many teams.
yeah, I get. Well, honestly, it's money. Again, that's
That's
again
true.
what you
I mean,
mentioned about the
that's
streaming
the thing for
thing.
everything.
It's like, yeah, they won't make a flat rate for the streamers because they want to make the most money, and you
Yeah,
know,
you got
anti.
lockout games, the Brazil game, which you had to get like whatever to stream, and then we just had to sign up for Fubo and then cancel it, and all these places like the Fubo I signed up for is like one day, so I had to cancel it right after the game, the free trial, otherwise I was going to get charged $40. But they do it because yeah, money, obviously. But
I
uh,
one of my hotter takes for the year is that people are going to get very tired of the NFL by the end of this year. I think they're killing the golden goose. I think that too many streaming services, too many international games, too many
I will
attempts at
say I
like
am a little bit
alternative
fatigued
celebrity
already.
cameos.
And it's not just because our team is losing, but it's just like fantasy is
Yeah,
great
lots of
and stuff,
injuries,
but there's tons of injuries, right? There's
too
celebrity
much gambling.
endorsements. Yeah, there's always a sports book ad. Um, and
Yeah,
then
people
every
getting
week it's a challenge to try and find like even like not in market games sometimes have exclusive streaming rights. So then you have to go find something else. And I think it kind of preys on the competitive nature of a lot of these,
Mhm.
whether it be fantasy or betting or just you know watching a game. It kind of yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
But yes, opening drive, first play, the Texans throw an interception. The Vikings respond with a touchdown. The Texans miss a field goal with one of the best field goal kickers in the league. The Vikings score another touchdown, and kind of immediately you're just like, yeah, this is already over.
I mean, when
Um,
you're having a team miss the field goal on the first field goal attempt, I feel like that sets the
right?
tone because now it's no longer a game of we have to get down the drive enough to get into field goal range. It's now a gamble, even if we get into field goal range, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times when we're talking about games like, okay, this kicker's range is 50 yards to 60 to 59, right?
Mm.
And a lot, especially when we're talking about the 2-minute warning and halftime, and then switching a possession in halftime, we're seeing a lot of coaches trying to just get as far as possible, right? Because then they could just
Mm.
get that extra few points to make it into a one possession game. And when you're starting off, not only not getting a touchdown on your drive, but when you think you would have guaranteed points in the field goal, I mean, nothing is guaranteed, but to a point, like a touchdown is a more risky play than just going for the field goal right on the fourth down.
In this
And
season where offense has been inconsistent, you have to be sure you're going to get the
you got to
3
take the
points, and if
points
you
where you
can't
can.
guarantee
Yeah.
that,
And it's
um,
it's just yikes. I
yeah.
feel like that sets the
But
tone for the rest of the game of like we can do whatever we want and you don't have a means to even steadily come back from it because your slow and steady approach isn't even going to work half the time.
yes, Kevin O'Connell, the Vikings coach, has just been scheming up devious stuff. Sam Darnold, former number 3 pick, picked the same year of Josh Allen, if you can believe that, who's on his third team,
I
um,
was like, he used to be on
or
the
fourth
on
team.
Washington, wasn't he?
He Jets, Panthers, 49ers. That's the other one.
49ers, not Washington.
And
49ers.
now he's a Viking. And there are times when the old Sam Darnold, like Sam Darnold's biggest weakness is that man just loves making risky plays and having them blow up in his face. That man loves throwing
He
turnovers. He
loves
just can't
being
help
cute.
himself. He's like a dog chasing a car. It doesn't matter if he's in the street. It doesn't matter if there's traffic. Just got to go for it. And fortunately, the offense they've built around him is good at mitigating those in favor of the big plays he can do. And it helps that Justin Jefferson is basically putting the league on notice of like, I think you guys forgot I'm the best at this,
I was
and
saying,
I'm
yeah,
going to
Justin
show you
Jefferson is
all by looking
insane.
really cool all the time.
He's so insane.
But
But
yes, and on the Texans end, it's not time to worry yet. They're still 2-1 after this game, but they just feel I don't know, like it does feel like the hype got a little out of hand for them when they still have things they need to fix. The defense hasn't been as consistent as they'd like. Derek Stingley Jr., who was supposed to be their star cornerback, just really hasn't had it this year. He kind of got humiliated in this game by Jefferson. Their offensive line, they've already lost multiple starters to injuries, and they just simply have not been able to run the ball. And it does just feel like the pressure of like not surprising anyone this year has grinded on them a little bit.
I'm glad I did
Um,
not push for them like I did last year in our cast pop predicts.
right.
I had better I had a better outlook of them last year than I do this year, and I think that's so far has been founded. We'll see if they can come back though. I don't know what their
Yeah.
schedule looks like, but they've already taken on some heavy hitters in their division, so I imagine that maybe if they can get matched up with a team like I don't know, I would say the Panthers is the joke, but the Panthers have been locking in recently, so I don't even know what what team is like the stinker team that you could because
Right.
as we're seeing a lot of these teams that everybody is writing off like in the past like the Jets like everyone said oh the Jets stink you know they
Mhm.
have won more than the Giants if I'm not mistaken this season
Yes.
and you have the Panthers who have won a game which is more than I've and they've made it competitive in a lot of these last few games with Andy Dalton. And it's just interesting. Like, there's not this fallback bad team to go to.
Right.
The Cardinals will be bad. The Cardinals are good. You know, and
The
I mean, the
advantage they
Giants are
have
still
right
bad, I
now
guess. But
The advantage they have right now is that their division is really weak, and that gives young teams enough cushion to be like, well, figure it out. To that end, to our lowlights,
yeah.
hey, hey, Caleb, Anthony, Trevor, the NFL kind of needs one of you to be good right now. Hmm? Um, so, like I said, we kind of have a dearth, like the middle tier of quarterbacks and like the lower high tier is kind of in a very flummoxed spot right now. So the Colts played the Bears. They ended up winning 21-16, but there were no winners here. This was a hideous, hideous football game. Um, this is supposed to be a matchup between two of the coolest young quarterbacks in the league. Caleb Williams, who was the number one overall pick last year and supposed to be the savior of the Chicago Bears, who have never really had a good offense, and Anthony Richardson, who you've seen I've been trying to trade in
I was gonna
fantasy.
say, I
Uh,
think a lot of this is coming down to the fact that he was your quarterback for this week.
I
But
mean, he's also just been very bad.
yeah, he has.
Like 6'4", super freak from Florida, super fast, super strong, frequently injured. But I mean, it's kind of the thing, right? Like the comment was he could be one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but he's really raw. He's not really ready to be a star quarterback yet. He's going to need time. You're going to need to develop him. And everyone's like, yeah, yeah, sure, we can be patient. And now that he comes out and doesn't look very good, everyone's like, more or less.
I'm glad that the Liches from Hell came out to voice their opinions on this. But yes,
Yeah, they got a lot of money on him being a sleeper MVP pick.
I
They
guess
can't get that
so.
money back. But yes, 10 of 20, 167 yards and two interceptions for him. It really is amazing. Just every other throw you see him, and you're like, can he not hit the side of a barn? They end up winning exclusively because Shane Steichen, former Eagles offensive coordinator, is very good at developing a run game. And Jonathan Taylor went off for two touchdowns and just kind of looked like his old self. Meanwhile, Caleb had to throw the ball 52 times. Like the numbers aren't, they're not as bad as they could have been. 363 yards and two touchdowns, but two interceptions. The problem with Caleb right now is the offense is just not very designed well. Their offensive coordinator is Shane Waldron. It's his first year after coaching the offense in Seattle. And very famously, Jackson Smith, the wide receiver for the Seahawks, was asked, like, hey, so your old offensive coordinator is going to go coach Caleb Williams. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or do you have any advice? And he kind of looks around sheepishly and goes, is this live? It's like, yeah, yeah, we're recording this.
That's
And he
not a
just
good
goes,
sign.
yeah, he's literally just goes, good luck, man. And you're like, ah, I see. Literally, the Bears team so far, especially for a team that had a lot of upside on offense, is a masterclass in I see. And it's like, well, they didn't really invest in their interior offensive line, but that won't be a problem. Every single play, Caleb Williams is running for his life because the entire inside of his offense is caving in, and you're like, I see. Their running back they paid a lot of money for, DeAndre Swift, former Eagle. You're like, he looked good on the
Mm.
Eagles. He looked good on the Lions. Why isn't he? Why don't they want him anymore? And you see, like, when he doesn't have a good offensive line, he has no vision whatsoever and kind of just runs into a wall. And you're like, ah, I
Yeah,
see.
because he's used to the Kelsey era of offensive lines, and
Yes.
like this Goliath defense that he could use to kind of scope out a play. But when
Mm,
he doesn't have that time and he can't, like,
exactly.
there's no space. He doesn't
Right.
process it as
Unless
fast as things
the
that are
unless the
other guys.
direction you need to go is carefully laid out, he just does not know
Hmm.
what to do.
There's
Um,
no switching it up for him after a play call is made. So I should say, like,
exactly.
he will absolutely go to, and this was like this in the Eagles too. Like, I remember
Mhm.
watching the Eagles season last year, and it was the same thing. Like, if a play call, and they talk about it after the play, but if a play call was for Swift to go out right and try and just get out, and he would always do it right. Like, there was no trick plays with him. It seemed like.
Mhm. Yes, he is a great example of like why having a great rent, like why you would spend extra money on a Saquon Barkley or a Derrick Henry of like elevated, a guy who can make
Yeah,
it work. Caleb,
talk about a wide receiver that's been just excellent, Derrick Henry. But, well, that's
mm,
for next week's discussion, which I will not be at.
right,
But I
right,
just
right.
had to get my 2 cents in.
But yeah, Caleb Williams. So Caleb Williams is kind of in a middle ground right now between nature and nurture because the team is objectively kind of screwing him. Like all the talk about like, oh, this is going to be the best situation a quarterback's ever got into. He's got three great receivers. He's got an okay running back. It's like, yeah, but that's not really where the league is going. You want a steady run game. You want a strong offensive line. You just want to be patient. But at the same time, like you can tell he's getting very tired. He looks a little shell shocked from how many times he's had to run. But at the same time, a lot of the mistakes also come down to he's just not nearly been as accurate as you would hope. A lot of it feels like what I would call arm arrogance, where it's like young quarterbacks who get drafted high, kind of in their first year, try to test what they can and can't do at this level where like there's a handful of plays where you're like, hey, if he threw that in a college game, that would have been completed for a big game. But because everyone in this league is like the best player at their college, it's going to be get intercepted. It's it's hope you hope it gets better, but at the same time, like there's gonna be some growing pains. And by extension, Trevor Lawrence, sort of the darling. I would describe him as he looks like the movie, like the if someone made a Tom movie, that's the ideal
That's
archetype of who
me.
they'd cast. You but blonde and with like a thinner face,
Oh, thanks, bro.
basically.
No, I'm kidding, kidding.
Not like that. Like I mean
I
like
know what you
jauntily.
mean. I know what you mean. I know. Yeah, he was actually one of our prospective quarterbacks that we were thinking about drafting. Eventually, we went with Lamar Jackson and Goff. For some reason, we went with Goff. I think that was Kenny Mac's joke draft, but um, yeah, he was looking good last season, and I think he's been on the up. He's been okay, I would say, so far. I
It's
mean,
starting to, but it's starting. Yeah, I would say he's looked up and down, but it's starting to
yeah,
deteriorate fast.
it
The
is. The
Buffalo Bills just
oscillations are
pantsed
definitely
them,
going downhill.
right? And like he was like the prince who was promised. He was like this generational prospect, and it just gets tough because it's like at some point you can't keep making excuses for the quarterback. Like a
Hmm.
lot of good quarterbacks have been on bad teams and have been able to at least get them to respectable. Like Matthew Stafford slaved away on the terrible Lions teams for like 10 years and was at least able to look competent if individually, if not as a team. Like Trevor Lawrence only mildly looks competent by himself. The one throw he had that got intercepted against the Bills looked like a high school player pass, where it just guy wide open by about 10 yards, like coverage blown. He throws it 10 yards over his head, and DeMar Hamlin's just waiting there. Um, like one of these guys kind of needs to step up for the health of the league, just to like because we need good quarterbacks. Um, but And then my final low light, as we're kind of speed running this section. So Bryce Young isn't playing another NFL game, is he?
No, probably not.
Um, because the nature versus nurture thing, what we've discussed, has kind of become the theme for this episode. So um, like a lot of people really stuck their necks out for Bryce during this week because they announced he wasn't going to start on like Monday. Their coach, Coach Callahan, like he was brought in to develop Bryce Young. Seemingly pretty quickly realized that that was going to cost him his job. He was going to be a one and done unless he made bold, dramatic. This absolutely was a business decision in terms of like, if I keep this guy in and we keep losing,
We're
I
gonna go
will get fired.
bankrupt.
Yeah, I'm personally fucked because they will side with him over. They will blame me for this. But if I can do well with a different quarterback, I can probably save my job, or at least try to save my job, or at least guarantee like I can get hired by someone else because they'll be like, ah, he wasn't that bad. So they bring in Andy Dalton, who is kind of the platonic ideal of what I've been talking about in terms of the mid-tier quarterbacks, where it's like, is he ever going to win you a Super Bowl? Almost certainly not. But he can get you to the playoffs. Like, if you have a good enough team, he can get enough wins.
Hmm.
And it is kind of disturbing how much better the Carolina Panthers looked.
It
Uh,
was night and day.
36 points, 3 touchdown passes, 131 yards on the ground. Kind of like, and it really wasn't even that close. The Raiders kind of just started scoring in garbage time. Like, in reality, if you take away the points the Raiders scored in the fourth quarter, it was like they really only scored 7. Truly a top down incredible performance. And like, Bryce Young is the other end of the nature versus nurture thing because it's like it's getting harder and harder to see any scenario where Bryce Young could succeed because when you look at him, you just realize like there's just not enough there. There's not like a spark. Like he
Hmm.
was always going to be a historical outlier. There's never been a quarterback as small as him or as thin as him. And like the other quarterbacks who are kind of in that tier had some kind of like great physical gift that justified drafting them. Like Kyler Murray's very small, but he is explosive. Like he has explosive legs. Like his change of direction just makes it impossible to tackle him. Russell Wilson was also very small, but like when he was good, he's another guy I have to be like, no, trust me, Tom. He was good at one point. Um, he not only had these incredibly stout legs that let him stay upright, but he also just had, again, much like Daniels, just this moonshot cannon. Like he used to play baseball, so he just was able to whip the ball. Drew Brees just had this incredible sense of vision where he could just like dissect the play, and you look at it, it's like Bryce Young does not really have very many physical gifts. He's not particularly strong. He's not particularly fast. His arm's not that strong. He's pretty accurate, but not that accurate, and doesn't have a lot of flexibility on the arm angles he can make. And it's like at some point, whatever intangibles he does have are getting drowned out, like the leadership stuff. Like the leadership stuff doesn't really matter if you're not able to win games.
Yeah, it's true.
Um, and for the Panthers, this is huge because it's like at some point, you needed to do this to see if you actually have a football team. Because when you look at Bryce Young's stat, like sort of numbers analytically, it's like he was so bad it was making it hard to tell if it was the team or if it was just him. Like this team is in a rebuild mode right now. They are kind of in a we need to figure out what kind of football team we want to make with a new coach and presumably another top draft pick. So a part of this was, and you spent a decent amount of money on this team to try and make Bryce Young work. So you have to see, like, okay, maybe the Bryce Young thing's over, but we have to at least see if all the other what parts are we keeping as we continue to rebuild. And watching this normal football game, because this is the first normal football game they've had, it's like, okay, well the offensive line is okay, all right. This Deontay Johnson's good. Okay, maybe we can make it work with Chuba Hubbard at the running back position. We probably could use another wide receiver, but we have some upside there. The defense is a little thin. Like, you look like a football team. And that's like at the end of the day, I think that is the difference between a quarterback who I think has potential and a quarterback who doesn't. When he's out there, even if he's rough, like Josh Allen was rough those first couple years, where like he would make boneheaded plays, he would put the team like he would get the team into bad situations, but you're like at the same time it looks like a football team. Like you're like I believe this can work somehow. I just don't see a
I
way they
believe
could
that
have
we
worked
will
with
win.
Bryce Young.
But yeah,
Um,
I to kind of piggyback off that, it was funny because our friend Kenny Mac, you all probably don't know him. He's never been on the podcast, but he's my best friend, and we're on a team together. And he's been a Panthers fan his whole life, and we always clown on him for it. Even before I knew what football was, I knew that before I knew about football like this in depth, I knew that the Panthers were bad, and so did he. Like he was like the joke was that Kenny Mac would never see a Panthers Super Bowl, right? And to say that the realization that our entire fantasy team is now made up of mostly Panthers to get us the most points, and that the people we're not considering trading this trade block are like Andy Dalton and like D Johnson on the Panthers, and it's crazy. Like, and Kenny Mack had said this before, but if you had told him that, this would be the Panther season, he wouldn't have believed you because, again, I guess it was just all young and like that kind of culture around him, and now they have this new quarterback. They're really like making these plays and actually being competitive. They're not winning a lot; they're still losing, but it's
Right,
less of blowouts than it was.
right. It's hard to see a scenario where they make the playoffs, but at least you can see a scenario where they're able to get to the playoffs at some point. Like, this team is not as bad as those first couple games suggested. Their quarterback was that bad. And again, that's the difference. It's like, is this team bad because of the quarterback, or is the quarterback bad because of the team? And this is
The
emphatically
eternal
the
question.
quarterback hurting the team. That's kind of the question you need to ask as you're like evaluating quarterbacks and evaluating talent. Um, all right. I have two quick notes for the week in our notable notes section. Who the hell is Carson Steele, and why do I need to care about this? So, are you familiar with this story?
Okay, I'm not, and it's funny you mention that because literally, before we got on, I was looking at the trade block for fantasy, and Joe had offered us for AJ Brown, an assortment of guys, including Carson Steele. And Kenny Mack literally goes, "Who is Carson Steele? His his stats are ass." And I've been looking forward to
They
kind of
are.
finding out who this guy is because I had a pretty busy day at school, so I didn't get to really dive deep into the trades that we got. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing this. So what do you got?
Yes. So he is a rookie running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was undrafted. So basically, if you don't get drafted, what happens is your agent is allowed to talk to teams. Like teams evaluate way more people than they can actually draft because you're allowed to have a practice squad, basically a like 20-ish group of guys who it's like, we like you, but we don't have enough room. Basically, we don't have enough room on the plane to make sure you make every game. But like if something happens with injuries and stuff, we want to be able to like call you up. Um,
Mhm.
and for the Chiefs, one of those guys was Carson Steele, a running back from UCLA. And because the Chiefs lost their star running back Isaiah Pacheco to, I believe, was it a broken? I think it's a broken leg. They
I'm
had to
pretty
call
sure,
Carson
yeah.
Steele up. Yes, for the Monday night game against the Atlanta Falcons. There's only one problem. So his sister was getting married that day, and you're
Mm.
probably thinking, wait, if he was getting draft in the draft, why would his sister schedule a wedding during the season? I don't know. Probably didn't think he'd get to play in an NFL game. So this might have been his one chance. So he's like, I gotta do it. And they put up a giant TV screen at the wedding to watch the game. He did fine. Who cares? It was like 17. It's an human interest story. It's not an actual football story. It's 17 carries for 72 yards. That was a little mean. I apologize. Um, and I'm just like, if that was my wedding, would I have been chill and cool about this?
I would
Like,
be pissed.
yeah, right. I was because you were the last member of our friend circle to get married, and I'm just like, if Tom had a secret other relative who was like a professional sports star, and you were expected to have a giant screen taking all the attention away from you and your lovely wife, and just the general vibes of the party, and focusing on this like other member of your family, would you have been cool and chill about that?
No,
Like if your
probably
sister was
not.
inexplicably a tennis star too.
No, I would not. No.
Yes, what a weird story. I just like look, at the end of the day, Carson, I get it, you gotta play in the game because God knows when you're gonna get another chance like this. But like and like I get it, if you want a fall wedding, you're gonna get a fall wedding. And he was undrafted for a reason. But like what a weird little human interest story. It's like these are the things that keep you going through a season. Just these weird little footnotes of like, hey, remember that time a guy like his sister was getting married? Oh yeah. Didn't he sound like a wasn't his name something you'd give a porn star?
That's
Yeah, oh
accurate.
yeah, now he has a podcast. He does podcasts with the Hawk Tuah girl. Yeah, it's cool. All right,
No, yeah,
good for
don't even get
him.
me started on that.
Um, but Jesus Christ. But yeah, and then my other note is I don't think we should start worrying about the final four teams from last year, but dot dot dot. So the final four teams last year were the Ravens, the Chiefs, the 49ers, and the Lions. And all of them have just had a couple red flags. The Chiefs, as I just described, are being held together with duct tape. The offense has not looked particularly dynamic. A part of that is because a very important player for them, Hollywood Brown, was hurt. He was supposed to be kind of their deep threat guy while Xavier Worthy developed. Travis Kelsey's just looked very, very slow. They're down to their third. They had to get a running back off the practice squad. And just in general, they've been winning these games by the skin of their teeth. And at the end of the day, wins are wins, but like the Chiefs have that sort of dark magic that dynasties have where it just feels like every break bounces their way. And you just ask yourself, like, it's like, all
Are
right,
we going to
but at
talk
some
about
point,
that pass interference call now?
yeah, stuff like that, stuff like a guy's foot stepping on the line in the opening game and costing the Ravens the win. And it's like,
That was
okay, but at some
heartbreaking.
point, the margin for error gets too thin for those things to keep happening. Like, can you really bank? Like, last season, they ended up going to the Super Bowl because the Bills were down to their fourth string linebacker covering Travis Kelsey, and the Ravens just had two backbreaking turnovers at the worst moments. And it's like, can you really bank on that happening again? Do you have enough talent to take advantage of that? The 49ers are in a similar boat where literally everyone is hurt. Debo Samuel, their star wide receiver, has been missing time. Brandon Ayuk is out of shape because he didn't show up for training camp. Trent Williams, their star offensive lineman, has been on and off. Um, Hardgrave, which is a hell of a cool name for a defensive end, is out for the year. And most pressingly, their star running back, who's kind of the engine of their entire offense, Christian McCaffrey. Uh, I'm not going to say they hustled a bunch of gamblers, but they kind of hustled some gamblers. Uh, Halfway through the preseason, they're like, "Oh, he has a calf injury, but he'll be fine." And then, literally a day before their first game, yeah, so he's going to miss the first game. And then a week later, he has an Achilles problem, so he'll be here when he's here. And this led up to them losing a very important divisional game to the Rams, 27-24. The picture I put in the chat before the video was the final shot of that game. The coach Sean McVay like tap. It looks like he's like trying to tap Coach Shanahan on the head, but it kind of looks like he's snatching his hat. And that's how that game felt. That felt like a hat snatcher of these like two coaches who are like identified as masterminds. And Shanahan once again kind of gets out coached. And as again, the margins of error get thinner when you have injuries, and I'm just worried their luck might have run out. Um, and the other two, the Ravens and the Lions, the records are good now. Like they're fine, but both of them just feel like they're kind of playing with their food a little bit. The Ravens had a huge lead before giving up 19 points in the fourth quarter to the Cowboys and almost losing that game. While the Lions gave the Cardinals two or three really big drives at the end of the game where they could have taken the lead, and the Cardinals just weren't really able to take advantage of that. And just all four teams just show just one or two big weaknesses that I think means we could really be seeing a very different playoffs from what we did last year.
I think you're right. And that was something
Um,
that I was considering when we were doing our rankings, but I really don't think we're going to see this kind of run of the mill kind of play. And people are saying like, "Oh, the Chiefs, they don't want to turn it on in the playoffs." And I'm like, "Yes, but there comes a point where injuries
you can
stack up,
only
and
get
there's
away
been
with
a
that so many
lot of
times.
injuries,
Right.
in this season already,
Yeah.
and I think that's something to consider as well. Um, is that a lot of the like even like AJ Brown got hurt the first game or whatever, and or in training, uh,
Hmm.
and he's been out for 4 weeks, and he's like the star Eagles wide receiver. I mean, of course Saquon's there now, but he is one of the constituent parts of it. Or Lane Johnson, um, and I think if we let these injuries pile up, even if they're recovered, they might never be recovered fully. And this year has
Hmm.
been bad for injuries so far. I mean, thankfully we haven't had any Damar Hamlin-esque serious things like that where somebody is like unconscious, but almost every game you watch now, there's somebody getting hurt, even if it's the people on the sidelines. I've seen 3 games in the last 2 weeks of the flag guys getting knocked and like, get bloody noses and being brought off in stretchers and stuff. And it's just crazy because, like you were saying, like throughout this whole conversation, like we're talking about the backbones of these teams, that the back is broken. Like,
Exactly.
what are you gonna do?
Yeah, and there's just only so many times you can be like, "We'll turn it on in the playoffs. We'll turn it on. We always do."
We always turn it
Shit,
on in the
why isn't
playoffs. Yeah.
anything turning on? All the
Hmm.
gears are missing.
Right.
And to wrap up this conversation, my question of the day or question of the week, which I've kind of pivoted to be for you, what team have you seen that has been the most exciting to watch out of all the teams you've seen?
That's a good question. Um, it's kind of a tie. I think that the Panthers kind of comeback story is really entertaining. Just seeing them actually getting like actually getting yards and actually running plays that are moving it down the field is crazy because for the first however many, what was it, 2 weeks, it was just like blowout after blowout. It was like they even mentioned it in the Andy Dalton game, but like up until that point, they were the only team who hadn't broken double digits in the first 2 weeks in total points scored. And I'm like, that's so rough. So that's been fun to watch. And obviously, there's still problems with their offensive line and defense, but I would say it's a tie between the Panthers and honestly, I'm kind of torn between Miami and Baltimore. Baltimore, I watch because we have their quarterback, and it's just really fun to watch. Uh, it's just really fun to watch Lamar.
They just it really is frustrating. As much as Derrick Henry's been frustrating me, goddamn, the vibes with him and Lamar Jackson in the
Yeah, it's
backfield
such a vibe.
together
Like, and it's always Derrick
with the
Henry as.
visor and the all black uniforms. I'm just like,
I
this
think
is
that's
like
also
the
part of it. I'm
objective
like, I really like
coolest
their
looking
colors,
thing.
like the colors,
Right.
the purple and black.
Right. It's
Um,
the right colors. The Ravens have like a marching band. It's objectively the coolest any NFL backfield has ever looked.
and I
Like
will
when
say
they're in shotgun.
they were like my favorite of the Final Four last season.
Right.
And I think that they're like my secondary. I mean, I would say I'm an Eagles fan first and a Steelers fan, but if I was looking at an objectively good team to root for, I would go for the Baltimore Ravens because they're just really fun to watch with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, and they have like their defense is good too. We've been seeing some interception picks from them, and it's it's really fun to watch a team that has a good chance of winning. And a team that, and maybe
Yes.
that's just because there's not too many people injured on that team. Maybe if there were more injuries, I would feel a little bit less excited about it. Um, so, and then Miami was fun the first few weeks. I don't know if it stayed fun though.
Yeah.
Honestly, I also really like watching the Bills. Unfortunately, like, this week was kind of a bust, but
Yeah.
watching the Bills is kind of fun because I know somebody who's a Bills fan. Maybe that's why I like the Panthers games too, is because I know that if they
Mm,
win, Kenny Mark's gonna be happy. Or he'll
yeah.
have some really funny memes about it. Um,
I will say
but
For
Josh
the
has got a
Dolphins.
cannon, so it's pretty fun.
Yeah. Josh is just pure entertainment on screen at all
And you're
times.
right,
But
the way he fumbles around is really funny. Also, he looks like
it
Dave, Anna's husband.
oh fuck, he does. Yeah.
Yeah, so
He's the least
that like always
athletic,
gets me.
super athletic person I've ever seen.
Isn't it? It's so funny. He looks like a King of the Hill character.
Well, yeah, he has a fucking pistachio for him. He would be like a mid-tier King of the Hill character. That's his thing. Um, but yeah, all good choices. I will say, yes, the Dolphins. I will say, if there's any silver lining to the Tua problem, it is now people appreciate. Like people got so heated on like he's not actually good. They've inexplicably underrated him. Where it's like, watch this team without him and see how listless they are. They're a rudderless ship.
I think the
Um,
Tyreek Hill
but
stuff
yeah,
obviously has put kind of a damper on that for me personally, but
yes.
they were still fun like in the first few sections.
Mm. But yes, and that was week 3. Thank you all for listening, even though it's, obviously a weird circumstance. We will be back later this week with week 4, presumably with Kevin, or I guess I'll have to bring Tom back. We'll have to see. We
Forbid.
will have to bring you guys on for like a mid-season sort of nightcapper.
And
But
Cal's gonna be like, "Wait, you guys have been watching football?"
yeah. And do you have any final thoughts you want to share with the adoring masses?
Um, Final thoughts. Final thoughts. I'm bad at this. Let's hope that people stop getting injured. Not only for the fact that we want our teams to win, but also just for the fact that there was this discussion about these new. They're always talking about. I don't know if you've seen the commercials about these new helmets, and I don't know if they're all implemented in all teams yet, and I think they should be. They help prevent against
Hmm.
concussions and stuff like that. And obviously, that's not the only injury we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of leg injuries as well, but hopefully everything stops being injured. Everybody stops being injured. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing next week. I think we have some exciting games coming up. I would say that this last week I wasn't super excited for anything, but I'm pretty excited for this upcoming week. So that's something to look forward to.
Awesome.
But yeah, thanks for having me on too. Even though,
Of course. Thank you for coming on under weird circumstances. That will wrap it up for week 3 of Carter and Kevin Explain Football. Tune in later this week to get week 4 as we get back on schedule. But until then, I'm Carter.
and I'm Tom.
And enjoy this start to the fall season, everybody.
Yeah, go out and get like some hot cocoa.
Buy a pumpkin.